Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Declan McConville and GP Mason for yet another instalment of the ACSOM Bulletin. Welcome back to the show, guys. How are you after another 4-0 away victory last night? Declan, I'll let you go first. You both froze. You got stage fright. You got stage fright there. Declan, last night, let's talk about it.
Feel a bit more upbeat. Is trying just to get this season over and done with and not feel too down. So the more victories, the better until we get this horror show over with.
It did turn into a horror show, and just before we came on, and it was one of the subjects last night, JP, who covered the game with us last night, January, the performances in January, self-induced, was definitely the final nail in the coffin for the 10 in a row dream, wasn't it, JP?
It seems that way, and if you strip back the points difference to what it could well be, if and when we win our other game in hand, it's the smallest of margins. Then really, if you're looking at the points we could have won in January, and it's just horrible, absolutely horrible to think that is the ultimate sort of, like you say, the nail in the coffin. Those two games against Hibs and Livy at home, where last minute equaliser from Hibs. And a fairly turgid display against Livingston, with not a shadow side, but certainly a fragmented side from what we would, if we'd played that team last night, for example, again in those two games, I don't think we would have come out with 2 points. And I don't think I'm being, brash saying that, but I think that's true.
No, I would agree with that. And when we do look back, and it's going to be with a lot of regret, we're going to be looking back at this season, because when you get results like last night, I asked the question, do Celtic have their mojo back? Yeah, people constantly say that there's an echo chamber in amongst Celtic broadcasts and Celtic podcasts where it's all negative and it's all anti-Celtic, anti-Lenny. I don't think it is. I really don't. I just think it's really... you look at a Celtic State of Mind and you look at the fact that I think we've now got 13 or 14 contributors. Declan is one of the youngest. What age are you now, Dec? I noticed
21.
Oh, you're getting old. You're not the youngest anymore. Amy's the youngest at 20, right up to, and I'm not going to reveal their ages, but Jim Orr and Stevie Mullen. Males, females, different, ages. I think we've got quite a few of the contributors have got a couple of season tickets in their households. We've got more season tickets than we've got contributors. It's all about views. It's all about opinions. But you'd be doing a job to try and extract positivity out of the goings on at Celtic Park. However, I'm looking at last night, and it really is with regret that you're seeing Turnbull flourishing into one of the best players in Scotland. Edouard finding his feet, finding his form. Rogic being reintroduced, and showing us what he is capable of. Scott Brown grabbing the game by the scruff of the neck. Welsh bossing it at the back. Taylor cementing himself at left back. And you think to yourself, this is what the team could have been all season long. And the regret I'm talking about is the fact that we've started doing it in February. JP, how frustrating is that as a Celtic supporter?
Well, by the way, just to touch on giving away ages, that's my first ever Celtic strip, so you could probably figure out what age I was when I had that. I was quite small.
Is it signed, JP? Is there signatures on it?
Yeah, I've been building up the signatures over the years, so I've got very fortunate to have Tommy Burns's on there. I've been just basically trying to get the whole 88 team, and that's my goal. So I've got Billy Stark, Pat Bonner, Peter Grant, Joe Miller, Andy Walker, Boo Hiss, etc. Still a great player for Celtic in the 80s.
You got McAvenny on it?
Yeah, I got Maca. Yeah, Paul McStay as well. So
have you got Paul McStay? Brilliant.
I met Paul McStay outside Starks Park. Do you remember Wraith Rovers and Celtic had a kind of rematch?
Yes.
The Coca-Cola Cup final.
Yep.
I went along with that. We won on penalties, which was ironic, and McStay scored this time, and then I waited at the door like a wee guy. I don't know what age I was probably in my 30s, and I waited for him and got to speak to him, which is a rarity because I think he lives in Australia, doesn't he?
He is. He doesn't do press, as far as I know. The one thing with Paul McStay, Declan, I'll come to you on this one. Quite a few years back, he announced that he was writing his autobiography. There's a few players in the kind of Celtic history that you would love to read their books. Paul McStay's one of them, John Clark being another one. I think Henrik Larsson's would be pretty good. I think that would be up there with Ibrahimovic, in fact, because, yeah, he's a hero at Celtic, but he's a hero wherever he went. And also, the other one I'd love to read is Fergus McCann's. I mean, Declan, have you any thoughts on McStay? Do you think we'll ever read his life story, Paul McStay, the maestro?
I think one day we will, for his longevity at Celtic. I'm sure there's plenty of stories in there, working under different managers, different eras at Celtic as well, going right from a kind of late 70s right up until the takeover, a guy that was there and seen it all. But John Clark's the one I think we all want to read, because I think he's the only Lisbon Lion not to have did a book to this present date. So I think he is the man, and his longevity, when you're talking about longevity at Celtic, he is one of those very, very special people in Celtic's history who you could describe as Mr. Celtic, along with guys like Billy McNeil and Nearly Malkin, as being there for such a long time and seeing so much success.
No, you're absolutely right. Hopefully we do see McStay's book coming to fruition at some point. Now, one of our contributors, Laura Bradburn, had the audacity to utter Paul McStay's name in the same breath as David Turnbull's, and I'm not quite at the stage where I'm about to call Turnbull the maestro, but he certainly is orchestrating the games at the moment. JP, let's look back to that second half performance last night. It was as if they clicked a switch at half time on Turnbull, because he was being pretty well man-marked in the first half.
Yeah, he was, and I was watching the Celtic fans TV guys' reaction, and they made the point that they moved Rogic out to the right and moved Turnbull back to his number 10 in the second half, and that was what the difference was. I didn't actually clock that myself, but it does make sense, and he just started finding the space again in the second half that we've seen him enjoy in the last couple of months, I suppose. So just going back to your point about the frustration's there on so many levels, in terms of, Turnbull didn't really come into the side until November. He's starting to flourish now. It's February. Edouard's hitting form again, for the first time this season. He's now top goal scorer, ahead of a right back, thankfully. It's all these things are so frustrating, but I'm really pleased to see Turnbull doing well. I said before on this show that a friend of mine's a Motherwell fan, big Motherwell fan, and he's been talking up Turnbull big time for a long time, and it's certainly starting to show in a Celtic jersey.
It certainly is. You mentioned Sorrow there, so I'll come to you, Dick. One of the disappointments, I guess, over the last couple of weeks is the fact that he's been benched, and I know that there's been car crashes, etc. He seems to be quite unlucky with things. He got food poisoning earlier in the season when he tried to do a bit of cooking, but it is quite disappointing. But over the last 3 games, do you think Brown is deserving of getting his jersey back?
I just think at his age now, Paul, he can't play 3 games in a row for Celtic. He played very well at Rugby Park against a poor Kilmarnock side. I mean, let's not dress that one up. I think Scott needs to be coached in a way that you're not exerting him that he's playing 90 minutes of football for you all the time, because I don't think he's got it in him anymore. He's 35. Legs-wise, whether they're still there or not, they're not there for 90 minutes anymore. So whether it's a case of you start Brown and take him off 60, 70 minutes, personally, that would be my favourable option. I'd be playing Sorrow over him. I know, as I say, he played well at Rugby Park, but I don't think he should be playing 3 games in a row. I get the whole, he's Celtic's captain, but he can still have a big influence in the dressing room, and he can still have a big influence from the dugout. But at this point in time, I don't see why Ismaila Sorrows did anything to be dropped. He was poor against St Mirren at home, but not deserving to be dropped, in my opinion.
We're seeing the rebuild already. We're seeing a bit of an exodus. JP Elhamed being the latest one to leave the building, and Cham's already away back to France. Frimpong, obviously we cashed in on Frimpong and got a fairly good price for him. Tommy Rogic comes back into the side. He's shown us flashes of absolute brilliance. I mean, the goal last night, for example, but even against Motherwell, he was doing things on that park that no one else is capable of doing. I was critical of his consistency. Then he went out and opened the scoring, so he made me eat my words. Is it a case of Rogic's going to give us the last fleeting performances before he also flees the nest, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's kind of on the cards. If he was almost away in the summer, you'd expect him. I think the move maybe just wasn't right for him. Maybe financially it would have been great, but he maybe sort of weighed it up and thought, am I too young to be going out into the footballing wilderness that is Qatar? Do you know what I mean? It's like when a manager goes away to one of these obscure leagues, they're kind of almost not writing off their career, but once you move yourself out of that limelight, then probably why Brendan Rodgers didn't go to China, because he maybe thought, well, I'll go out here. Yes, it's a big payday, but it's kind of game over a little bit at that point. But I was going to mention that last night, and I never made the point, but it was just about the where the players are actually going. If you look at Frimpong's an exception going to Germany, obviously, because he's not German and has no, as far as I know, has no ties to Germany. But it's interesting, given the current global situation and with travel restrictions and everything, that El Hamed's gone back to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Beaton's been linked with a move back to Israel, his native land, and where else? Cham's gone back to France. So it's no surprise really that these players have been linked back to they're going back to their home country, because obviously if they want to see their family and things like that, then there's no quarantine restrictions if you're in the same country. So I imagine we might see more of that. I mean, it's just speculation on my part. I don't know. I'm not sure.
That's a good point. It really is a good point, JP. And when you look at the fact, and I made the point last night, Declan, that 3 of our loanees on big wages are sitting on the bench. We've now got 4 guys in on loan. You would expect, maybe with the exception of El Yunusi, perhaps, that all 4 of them will go back to their parent clubs. If you then lose your 4, 5, half a dozen players that we've been talking about, Al-Hamid, Beaton, and Cham, Frimpong, and Rogic potentially, you've also then got to deal with Eduard, Christie, and then you think Ayer even. That's virtually their entire side. I mean, the rebuild, let's talk about the rebuild, Declan. How do you think Celtic are going to approach that? I mean, things are going to be completely different in the transfer market post-Brexit, but also, post-COVID in terms of the finance.
But, well, I recently wrote an article in the Alternative View and I used the word the squad was going to be decimated, and that is what we're going to be looking at. If we're really looking at Champions League again and being ambitious, we're going to need 5 or 6 first team players, guys that are going to walk in the door and walk into the first team. There's also a question of, if the setup changes, director of football comes in, new manager comes in, will some players maybe think, I would like to give this a bash? Maybe Christopher Ayer could be one of those guys. He's only 21, 22, I think. He might look at TCL and think, okay, decent new manager in, I'll give this another go here. So there's that potential. But again, whether Celtic are going to look to be a wee bit more internal and go again for British-based players because of the restrictions due to Brexit, and obviously COVID is not going to go away anytime soon, will be another possible option. Are we going to go back into that Championship market, look in there? Is there any other gems in the league we can go and pick? Is going to be an option, but we certainly need big players that are going to walk into the first team. It's not going to be just rebuilding a squad, it's rebuilding a first team at this point in time.
No, you're right, because when I look at some of what would otherwise be options, JP, it would be, right, let's have a look at what we've got bubbling under the surface here in terms of the youth players. And we've seen, obviously, Welsh coming in, and I'm delighted when a player like Welsh comes in and performs as well as he has. We'll come back to him in a second. And you think, who else? Where's his contemporaries? Is it Robertson? Is it Henderson? Are they going to come in and make a difference? I don't know if they've had enough games so far to say for sure that they will. Johnson's coming back to fitness. So there you've got a crop, 4 or 5 young guys giving new blood. I thought Connor Hazard would have been part of that, but he seems to have fallen right out of favour. So there's one element. You go to your youth, you go to that well. The other one would be the throes of players that we put out on loan. I mean, we put guys out on loan, a dozen every single season out on loan. Some of them are first teamers, some of them have come in for several million quid, like, Bayo and Shved and Hendry. These players that, is there a gem in there? Could we bring someone back like we did with McGregor, like we did with Ayer and Christie? Is there maybe a gem in there? And then the other option, of course, is exactly what Declan says. You're going to be forced to go out there and buy ready-made first-team players, and we've already seen what happens when you do that, to the degree where you're bringing 6 guys in, like we did this season. It takes a long time for them to gel. Some of them don't gel at all. Obviously, Duffy made an appearance last night. It looks as though he might be making more appearances before the end of the season. So I think this rebuild, we're all accepting of the fact, JP, that it's happening, but what's it going to look like?
Well, I mean, I certainly don't want to anger any watchers or commenters with the news that, you remember when Aidan McGeady was sold, Neil Lennon used the bulk of that money to rebuild a side. So, there is the possibility that, with the money that we get in for, be it Ayer or Edward or whoever, that money, whilst also probably filling a bit of a hole in terms of the finances that we've not earned this season. I'm not saying it's going to be Neil Lennon that's going to rebuild the side, but sides can be rebuilt from sales of players. We've seen it happen before. It's just about how we manage the market, and yeah, there maybe would be a sort of smattering of youth players coming in and getting a run like Welsh has. And I just saw someone commenting, Zinkovics 8754 said, "Looks like the Welsh injury last night is not as bad as we think. Thanks, the maker." Presume he means God. Yeah, I really hope that is true, because that's, I really, feel for the guy, and it was a horrible one last night. Like I said, I've gone over on my ankle like that, and it's so painful, and can be a long term. Well, not a long term, but like can be a good few weeks anyway.
Yeah, I mean, see, when you're looking at the young guys coming through, Declan, and Celtic have a real tradition of doing that. There comes with that a real sense of patience. Patience is required from the fan base. I mean, we've seen in the past teams trying to throw in half a dozen young guys, and it's very difficult for them. I mean, some of the examples, obviously the famous one being Manchester United with Alan Hansen's comments that you don't win anything with kids. But there's been other examples where clubs have been in real financial stress and have had to play young kids, and it's not worked out well. I remember Dunfermline had to do it, and they played a whole host of youngsters who simply were not ready for the first team. Quite a few of them fell by the wayside. I think, looking back to that team, the only one that seems to have made a name for himself is the boy Ross Millen, who's getting a game every week for Kilmarnock. And I remember Hearts doing it as well, obviously when they were in financial peril and Gary Locke was in charge, and you throw all these kids in, it can sometimes damage their careers. Celtic are not at that stage where we're going to have so few players that we're going to have to play the kids. But going forward with, as I say, the COVID and also the Brexit situation, we are going to have to focus on the youth development. Now, you mentioned something before, Declan, about the director of football. We're taking it now as granted that is going to happen. We're going to have a director of football in place, do you reckon?
I think so. And I think on the rebuild, you need to sort out your youth academy, because it doesn't seem as if it's been working to the extent we'd all like it to work. Yes, we've had successful projects through in Tierney's, McGregor's, Forest, but they're just a handful, and it's not what we would maybe expect in terms of the facilities we've got, the type of budget we've got, and the type of markets we shop in. And there's guys like Leo Connor, if you remember him, that we brought in, along with Frimpong, who's nowhere to be seen. So he's away on loan, I think, to Tranmere Rovers. So there is guys in there, but whether or not they can make the step up, after being decimated coming back from Dubai, we saw a lot of youth players get the chance. One of them, the boy Harper, looks as I think he's away to America. And there's other guys that just don't look as if they're going to cut it. So Stephen Welsh is one of the biggest positives this season, and this was a good time to bed him into the team, because there's no real pressure just now. I say that disappointingly, of course, because the league to me is over. But it was a chance for Stephen Welsh to get in there and get a bit of game time, get a bit of experience. But again, we don't want to play Russian roulette getting into the Champions League, playing young guys that could just completely ruin them and put a real risk to our season, because we know how important Champions League is, and we're going to need to take the real tough route this year.
We really are, and as you say, the real tough route, because it's tough every single year, Declan, but it's going to get even tougher when you've not won the league. Obviously, what then happens is there's a real shift and impetus from a club who are throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, at winning the league this season, in Rangers. And pulling that off gives them the opportunity to have access to funds that hitherto they've never had access to, and that is the Champions League money. So you're looking at that situation and how that pendulum swings in a different direction, whereby Celtic are in a situation where, the season ticket, renewals is coming up very, very quickly for the club. We were talking last night about how they're going to tackle that from a charm offensive, JP, because they certainly can't be in a situation where there's a massive drop in season ticket sales, because levied to that, you're also going to have potentially the Champions League cash not being in the bank as well, and that's a double hit. So I'm looking a wee bit further forward, not being pessimistic here, but it's a real possibility that that's going to set Celtic back quite a bit, and obviously it's advantage Rangers then, isn't it? Not only will they win the league, but then if they get through the tricky qualifiers, they then access the riches of the promised land. That's my biggest concern at the moment, and I think when people like myself are coming out and saying Neil Lennon has to go back in October, it was with all this in mind. You're thinking ahead. It's not about knee-jerk reactions, and because back in October we could have still salvaged this season. And as Declan quite rightly says there, and it's painful to say it, it's not going to happen, is it? So when you're looking ahead to that, JP, the youth development is important. The director of football should be taking care of the structure there and making sure that, if we were ever in a situation where you're playing the youngsters, and normally we would see it in the last couple of games of the season. I think famously, one of the guys that was on the telly last night, Jimmy Goodwin, played for Celtic in such a game. Dalglish was in charge. We threw in, was it 8 young guys? It was the youngest Celtic side ever to line up. Henrik Larsson came back from his leg break. We played Dundee United at home. That's when you normally seen a clutch of youngsters all getting thrown in at once. We could be in a situation next season where we simply don't have the finance to go and sign 6 players permanently. Because, what kind of price are you paying for a player who's going to make a difference to your team? Is it £5 million? Is that your base price?
Well, you look at Ayeti, that was a $5 million signing, and he's been okay. I think he's not really done the business yet. I saw things from him last night that certainly were a bit encouraging, but it doesn't look utterly comfortable. But with regards to the signings of players, it's going to be potentially a huge outlay. With regards to the season tickets, I would hope that regardless of who's the manager, that people would still want to buy a season ticket if they can afford it. And I know that you've said that it becomes a luxury now, and there's going to be people that have to make tough decisions. And I feel for those people, because it'll be horrible if this whole COVID situation has affected you to the point that you have to actually make that decision and go, right, am I going to have a family holiday this year, or am I going to get a season ticket? That could be the decision that's been made in a lot of households at the moment, and that. I know it's first world problems and all that, but it's still a decision. And, for guys that have been going to, or girls that have been going to the games for years, to suddenly have to make that sort of difficult decision is hard. But I just want to get back to the games. And, when the season ticket form arrives on my doorstep, I'll be filling it in and sending it back, regardless of what's going on. Because, I'm in a position where I don't have dependence, on me, and I'm not, running a household. So I just want to get back to the games and watch the games, and that I would hope that is the appetite that a lot of people who maybe are in a similar position to me are what we'd do, just to be like, right, look, we've not been at a football match for a year, And it could be a year and a half by the time we get to actually go to a game. So to sit here and sort of stubbornly go, no, I'm not giving Celtic my money because they've not sacked Neil Lennon. I'm not in that set of thinking. And there's a lot of comments coming in about Steve Clarke. I don't, it's obviously just maybe someone's picked a name out of a hat there, but I wonder if there is anything.
Well, let's talk about it, because we're in a situation. Neil Lennon came out yesterday after the game. He was speaking about a performance that he described as outstanding, magnificent, and he was delighted with the performance. And, he picked out certain players, one of them being Ryan Christie. He said that he was revitalised. He spoke about Tommy Rogic, Edouard being back in amongst the goals, and David Turnbull with obviously his orchestration of events last night. It seems as though, for me, you would be building your team around players like Turnbull, like Sorrell. But what I think when we're looking at the manager situation, Declan, I'm of the view that Neil Lennon's going nowhere. I want Celtic to win every game between now and the end of the season. Absolutely. I want to, shorten that gap. You want to put as much pressure as possible, make it as uncomfortable as possible for Rangers. Don't allow them just to, waltz off into the sunset with this league title. Yeah, I think it's gone, but you need to have a bit of respectability about that. Win every single game, and I think that's why, in part, players like Scott Brown will continue to play. Tommy Roderick's a go-to guy for Neil Lennon, but in the summer, we do need that change. I'm not going to have an avatar of Neil Lennon with a big red score through his face. I'm not going to have that. That's not what I'm going to do. When JP quite rightly says when it comes to renewal, I'm not withholding money. Personally, I think it's a personal choice. That doesn't make me the enemy. That doesn't make me and JP and others like us part of the problem. I don't subscribe to that at all. But you can affect change. Now, one of the biggest things that we have had in the past, Declan, is we've had a very active supporters group who are able to affect change because they're able to make these protests and they're able to make them in such a way that sometimes if they decide to make a point, it goes global, and that's the Green Brigade. But over the last few weeks, obviously with the unfurling of banners, etc., what do you think that's done to the relationship that possibly existed between the Green Brigade and the club themselves? Because obviously, I'm not saying that the club are in the Green Brigade's pockets or vice versa, but there are occasions where both the Green Brigade and Celtic need to work together. For example, there was obviously discussions about safe standing areas. You have to have a group of people having season tickets in the same part of the stadium. You've got to go in and prepare tifos, for example. So there is a communication. Do you think that's going to be irreparable, or do you think that's one of the things, along with fan engagement, that the incoming Dominic Mackay has to focus as a priority?
I think it needs to be a priority, and not just for GB. I think for other Celtic fans who will feel completely, just let down this season and as if they've been taken for mugs. And I think that is a feeling by a lot of people, that the communication has been horrendous, that, when messages have been sent out, it's not been, in the best intention at times. We heard Dubai was in the best of intentions. In hindsight, I think we all know it wasn't. It was a big risk that was taken. But moving forward to season tickets, Celtic are going to really need to appeal to people, because there is people out there struggling with money. There will be people out there, to use that terminology being used, scunnered by everything going on at Celtic just now. And how you get those folk back on side is going to be crucial in moving forward, because I think if you go back to our most recent success under Brendan Rodgers, everybody was in harmony together. That's the fans, the players in the park, the manager, and those guys up top even. Even then, there was still calls of, there was always going to be fan discontent. I don't think you can really say there's been a time when Celtic fans have not been happy with those in charge, even under Fergus, when he was booed. So it's always been there, under Robert Kelly as well, a man who proceeded over the European Cup success. So there's always going to be that between fans and board. But you need to have everybody working together to bring a positivity and to move forward as a football club. But, come season ticket renewals format, I will be renewing, but I think for a lot of people, they might hang off to see what happens, and that might be the best thing that seems to work in the board's language is finances, because as a football club just now, we're in uncertain times. We don't know when we'll be back at the football. We don't know when we'll have a full stadium. So if finances are the only language that the board want to play with supporters, I think a lot of people will hold off until change comes, and I think change will come, but I think people will just give it that wee bit of time before they act.
Kevin Graham made the suggestion last night that this is part of the campaign, if you like, by the club, whereby they're going to drop whatever the update is, Declan, in and around the time of the renewal, either just before the renewals hit your doormat, or during the period that you have to renew your tickets. Do you think the club would do that? I mean, if that is the case, you're still going to have to give information in relation, I would guess, to the management situation, which I can't see them doing whilst Neil Lennon's still in position.
I possibly think the club might carry on the kind of season tickets for a wee while, and they might not arrive as soon as we all may think they might arrive. That is a very possibility until they kind of make a decision on this. But on a manager situation, would I be surprised if season ticket forms come out before we've replaced or changed the management setup? No, but I think you need to have some kind of plan. If everybody thought that Dominic Mackay was going to appease the Celtic support at this point in time, it's not on, because we can see that people are not happy. It's not just fan podcasts. I know people are getting the blame. It's not just one fans group. People are not happy with how things have unfolded this season, not happy with performances in the park, not happy with decisions made at the very top, and that needs to be solved moving forward, because if you don't, you're going to make a lot of people more angry, and that is not going to come very nicely in terms of season ticket renewals, because people are skinnered, and you're going to need to change something to make a bit of positivity back at the football club.
You're right. I think there's been so much happened this season, and there is so much kind of like fragmentation amongst the support, that to continue as is with Neil Lennon would be commercial suicide. It really would, because you're not going to get the 57,000 season tickets. Now, this season is a season like no other. We were going for 10 in a row, but also, JP, there was really this big appeal by the club to not only buy your season ticket, but you're basically investing in a situation where you're helping the club get through a very, very dark time, a dark time that a lot of clubs probably will never recover from. And then you've got other clubs who will need to basically take a sidestep for quite a number of years in terms of their spending and their finances. And it might take years for them to recover. I think Celtic, in relation to a club our size, are going to come out of this in as good shape as possible in terms of the business side of it. But on the football side, it's a completely different story. Now, the thing with this broadcast is people talk about who we're going to bring in. Everybody's got an opinion, and that is something everybody is entitled to, is an opinion on whether or not we keep Neil Lennon, and if he does go, who should come in. Now, Joe Porter has been supporting ACSOM for a long time. He comes in on a daily basis to make comments, or almost on a daily basis. So welcome back, Joe. You're watching on YouTube, and you're using the name, and I've never brought this up, I don't think. John Terry is now in the running for the job. JP is basically shaking his head in disbelief. Internally, I'm doing the same. What I would say about a name like Terry, and I would also use Frank Lampard in the same discussion, even though I know Lampard has more managerial experience. I think what you're going for there is you're going for profile. You're going for profile. You're bringing in, you think that, right, the fans need excitement. Let's go for a high-profile manager. That's not what we're looking for here. We're not looking for a marquee manager, are we, JP?
No, absolutely not. I mean, if John Terry excites anybody, full stop, then you need to take a good look at yourself. I certainly, I've got no interest in John Terry being linked with the Celtic job, nor Frank Lampard. Just because Frank Lampard got the Chelsea job. Frank Lampard got the Chelsea job because of his his lineage and his history at Chelsea. Put it that way. If he didn't have his playing career at Chelsea, I don't think they would have looked at him. But a guy that's managed Derby County for a season or something like that, like there's no way Chelsea would be appointing. It's the same with us and Neil Lennon.
100%.
Got the Celtic job in the first instance, or in the second instance, had he not had his playing career at Celtic. But just before we go on to talk about the managers, I wanted to mention something about in terms of the fans and what the Green Brigade do and have done. And I've agreed with some of it and not agreed with other things that they've done. But I was at very randomly, my friend Joe was working on a TV show out in Rome in 2019, and me and my friend went out to see him, but we tied it into a game. So we went to see Roma Milan. It ended 1-1, I think. But it was good to just go to that ground and see an Italian football match. But the Roma fans at that point were really, really anti their board and their manager. I think it was Ranieri that was the manager at the time. I might be wrong on that, but they were anti everything really at the club. And they at the start of the game, they held up in their sort of whatever there is, the North Curve or whatever it is called. They held up tifos of a supporter. It was the 30th anniversary of a supporter called Antonio De Falchi. Forgive me on my Italian pronunciation there, but he died at the San Siro 30 years prior in a fixture. So they held up these tifos for him. They were all over. Because I was like, who's that guy? And then I Googled him at the time and figured out what it was. But then they staged a protest in that obviously they paid for their tickets, they were season ticket holders or whatever, and they staged a protest in that game. They all turned their back on the game, and then I think it was in the 15th minute, they all just started to do a staged walkout from the game. So that whole stand was empty by half time. It was absolutely surreal to watch. Basically, the hardcore Roma fans just all leave the ground. We're winning at the time 1-0 as well, but it was just like, no, that's what they decided to do. So that was quite an effective thing, because it's still, you're still paying your money to the club, but you're showing your displeasure at what's going on. So just wanted to mention that.
No, I'm glad you did, because I'm thinking of some of the incredible work that the Green Brigade has done, not just within the stadium, but the charitable element of that as well, JP. And it's always important to underline all the good stuff that they do, Dec. And some of the tifos are astonishing. I mean, they're going to appear in Celtic history books in years to come. But it did occur to me the other day, it was brought up by Anthony Haggerty, one of our contributors, who has been a great addition to the squad. I think he's come in as a bit of a kind of midfield maestro himself, and he reminded us actually on the chat group that it's John Thompson's 90th anniversary this year in September. Fellow Fifer John Thompson, obviously buried in Carden Den, and you would expect the club and the fan base to do something very special for that occasion as well. You're thinking forward to September. I said to GP last night, I can't wait for the team, the ACSOM team, to get together in the studio. We've not been able to do it. We've not been able to launch anything, even though we opened at the end of July last year. But it'd be great to get everybody together. There's a wee bar area out there, and it felt so alien even just to talk about that. You know, get a dozen people together who all have that same state of mind, that Celtic state of mind, for a few sherbets and put the tunes on. It seemed bizarre. So even talking about September, and you wonder what could be done, obviously to celebrate and remember someone like John Thompson on the 90th anniversary, it still seems pretty alien, because I can't even visualise now what it feels like to be in a stadium of, I was going to say 60,000 like-minded people, but what I've learned on this podcast is 60,000 different opinions probably, all supporting the same club. But yeah, I think it is important always to underline that, JP, but I think it will be on the agenda, Declan. It will be a priority on the agenda of the incoming CEO that there needs to be more engagement with the fans, and bridges have to be rebuilt, because it seems as though at the moment that the bridges are being burned left, right and centre, and that's all down to the silence. What do you make of this review? Obviously that was the subject of the latest banner from the Green Brigade. What do you make yourself of this review? Are we going to get an update on that review?
I don't think we all get an update in the review. I mean, I've saw John Paul, who is probably the only person at the club that engages with the fans, you know, repeatedly repeating himself and saying he's been asking for it, but nothing. You know, I'm part of one of the people that goes along to the fans forums. We were meant to have a fans forum meeting in December. That still hasn't been reorganised, unfortunately. I heard Ian Bankier in his comments at the AGM saying, football is a fast-moving business. Peter is excellent in dealing with a fast-moving business. It's that fast-moving. The fans forum only meets 4 times a year to discuss the fast-moving business of football. So, you know, in terms of communication, we really need to get a hold of it, you know, get everybody involved, whether that's supporters groups, individual fans. The fans forum is great. I attend it. I get to get my points across. We hear from the board. We hear from different community groups. The last time I think we met was September last year. We met in Zoom virtually. Probably will meet again soon. But, you know, we need to have more of these interactions with supporters, because the fans want their club to be successful. The fans want to make a positive impact in the club, and that can only be done by listening to people. It's why you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen and hear what we're all thinking just now. We're all going through hard times, but, you know, fans have got issues, fans have got opinions and ideas. Let's hear them and let's see what we can do.
No, absolutely, and it's easy to do it these days, Declan. That's the big thing here, that there is nothing at all as a barrier in place of that engagement. I'm going to bring this up because Davey says King Henrik returning as manager would lift the place. I think this goes back into the same category that we were just discussing, JP, where you appoint a manager based on either an association with the club, i.e. Neil Lennon, or because Neil Lennon wasn't appointed as a manager first time round because of what he had done as a manager, and certainly not the second time round because his tenures at Hibs and Bolton wouldn't have been good enough for me to give him the Celtic job. Or clubs often appoint managers based on profile. They think, all right, that's going to excite the fans. Now, I made a suggestion pretty early on in the season, actually, where it looked as though Neil Lennon was struggling. And it was all around that subject, JP, of the fact that he didn't choose his backroom team. And you remember the Neil Lennon of old, during the first tenure, he did pick his backroom team. And it was Mjallby and Thompson, Gary Parker, for example. And what you had there was, it really is a team, and it looked fractured this season at various points of the season with Gavin Strachan, John Kennedy and Lenny. And again, I have no behind-the-scenes information in relation to their relationship, but it certainly looked fractured. And I just can't see when a management team is thrown together like that, how there would be any kind of synergy. So I made the suggestion, ex-player, bring in Larsson, but I think a few weeks later he ended up at Barcelona. For me, the guy is an absolute icon at Celtic Park, but he's never done anything as a coach or a manager, as far as I can see. My suggestion was bring him in to coach the strikers.
I mean, I wouldn't be adverse to Henrik Larsson being involved in some capacity at Celtic, in the coming years, purely because, I mean, I love the guy to bits. He's the greatest I've ever seen in a Celtic jersey. I was fortunate to see him score most of his goals in the flesh. And I've also had the opportunity to actually thank him briefly for that when I met him at Celtic Park during the James Milner Stilian Petrov charity game. Mm-hmm. I met him briefly in the stairwell of the lounge, and it was just like a huge moment for me. I mean, he's met millions of Celtic fans and all the rest of it, but like for me, that moment will live with me for the rest of my life. I got to meet the guy that I completely idolised, and I certainly wouldn't want anything to tarnish that. And I don't think Henrik Larsson's wise enough to not come in as his first managerial job to manage Celtic. There's no way he would risk his reputation with that. Despite the lure of it, I know. Obviously, people like Martin O'Neill said, I'd walk to Glasgow to manage Celtic, or as his dad said, you should walk to Glasgow to manage Celtic. But Martin O'Neill had managerial credibility at that point. Henrik Larsson doesn't have any, and I sincerely hope for Henrik Larsson. I'm sure he's all right financially, but the chat about Barcelona at the moment in terms of their finances, he might be looking to take any job he can get at the moment because they're in bad nick.
I mean, the other guy, and I'm not comparing them as players, but remember Shearer went to Newcastle as a manager. Remember, and you can definitely tarnish your reputation. I don't think he did, but I wouldn't like to see Larsson in that dugout. With us putting in performances like we have done this season. There's so many players there who, and I think coaches have this issue, Declan, when they go to get the badges. And you've maybe got a very, very good coach, and there's more and more coming into the professional game now who haven't played professional football, and they're up against someone who's an ex-player. And even the way that the non-playing coach is treated, and I'm talking to the guys quite regularly who've been in this position, is as if they're not as good a coach as the guy who played football. But they might be a far better coach than the guy. Just because he played football, it doesn't mean to say he can get it from there out here and actually express that message. And I think everybody knows the big examples of Mourinho, etc. But it's more and more common now that coaches and managers haven't played because, it's a completely different skill set. And I mean, you look at even some of the most successful managers we've had who weren't great players. The best.
Brendan Rodgers.
Brendan Rodgers, absolutely. And Jock Stein, of course, who was, by his own admission, an average player for Celtic. And he got a chance at Celtic at the end of his career, having played with Albion Rovers in Wales. And he comes to Celtic at that stage of his career. So, you're looking at quite a lot of names getting bandied about, but JP mentioned previously Stevie Clarke. Now, Stevie Clarke was previously interviewed for the Celtic job. I'm trying to get my timeline right here, and I think, was it when Ronnie Dyler got the job? Stevie Clarke was interviewed for it then, and he was obviously overlooked at that stage. I mean, he's gone on to do a fantastic job at Kilmarnock. You look at his CV, the clubs that he's worked with, the managers he's worked with, unbelievable CV. He's done a great job for Scotland. Would he excite you, Declan, as a Celtic manager?
Excite? Probably not. Would he get results? Yes, but I think going back to Stevie Clarke's comments after a game at Ibrox, he spoke about this whole West of Scotland thing. He was glad to get away from it, glad he didn't kind of stay about for that. So I think that Stevie Clarke wouldn't really be interested in a job at Celtic or even Rangers. He's got a great CV, obviously worked at Chelsea and has qualified Scotland for the European Championships, but I think that'll be his priority, it won't be Celtic, so I can't imagine Stevie Clarke would be the person to come in.
Now, Kevin Graham's not in the show today, but he's come in to make a comment. Afternoon troops, you can't shout for change and continue to spend money. Fact of football life. Now, Kevin obviously doesn't like capital letters, even after full stops. I don't know if his phone's working properly, or if he's doing it in the dark, or it's under the desk at his work. What do you think of that, JP? I mean, it's a situation where I've heard a lot of people saying they're not getting a penny from me until there's change. I don't think the club will react positively to that. I don't think they reacted positively to the protests, and I don't think they'll react positively to the banners, because if they're seeing to bow down to that kind of approach, then they're losing a bit of control, and I think it's all about control.
I mean, yeah, the whole not spending money thing, I get it. I get the argument. But I just don't think it's the one that I would choose to adopt going forward, because I just like I said, I want to go back to the games, and I want to see 11 guys on a pitch in Celtic strips. I'm not really that het up about who's in the dugout. If there was an appointment made that I was really, really against, like a John Terry or something like that, then I might change my mind. But at this moment in time, I'm not so anti-Neil Lennon that if a game happened tomorrow and we were allowed to go to it, that I wouldn't go. You know what I mean? I'd be there with bells on, because I just want to go back to the game and experience that, emotional outlet, really, that a game provides you with. Steve Clarke, yeah, okay, it might not excite. It's not maybe a flash signing as a manager, but I don't think we're in a position where we could be discounting Steve Clarke as a possibility, given his record, and also given the fact that he's a very good Celtic man. Not that makes any real difference, but he is. I know I could tell you a story, I won't, but I know for a fact he's a Celtic fan from Saltcoats as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And obviously, with regards to Stevie Clarke, there's other names that keep popping up. If you mention the name of someone who is not only an excellent coach, but also a high-profile coach, such as your Martinez and Benitez, you just get laughed at this juncture. That's just the state of the play at the moment. We're also told you shouldn't be speaking about a new manager because Neil Lennon's got the job. But let's look ahead. There's no way, surely, that Neil Lennon could still have that job going into next season. It's a whole new regime that he's going to be working under, if that's the case, and a whole new structure, because there is talk about a director of football. Now, one thing I would say before we move on to any further comments is I was very interested to see there that the football authorities down in England have sent an open letter to Twitter and Facebook, and this is in relation to various flashpoints that have been happening all around the English game in terms of death threats, racist abuse of players, and it's constant. They're talking about posts should be filtered and blocked, and there needs to be an improved verification process for reasons of basic human decency, to use the power of their systems to end the abuse. Declan McConville, what's your thoughts on that? Because it goes beyond football, doesn't it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, racism has no place in football. It has no place in life, in my opinion. And I think everybody on this show that contributes is of that same opinion. There is, some horrible stuff thrown about Twitter that we've probably all seen before. Probably even been on one side of it through comments related to our football club. That I think racism, it gets dressed up as sectarianism, but is just blatant racism. So I think a lot of times in Twitter, there's a lot of faceless people on it. There's a lot of people with no names that want to give abuse out, and they shouldn't be on it if they want to. You can't go into a pub and not be seen or said to do something to somebody's face. So that's how I'd, use Twitter, that you wouldn't accept it in a pub if somebody came up and started giving you this abuse with no face and you couldn't know who they are. So I think that's really important, and I think that's a step that should have been taken a long time ago, because I've saw most recently, I think it was Dyer at Kilmarnock was receiving a lot of really horrible racial hate, and it just should be something that's a part of the game. This is these guys' workplaces, and they're getting targeted at their workplaces. It's not acceptable. So I think that's a positive step to be made.
It is. I mean, this is one of these things, JP. I know I'm a wee bit older than you, but that wasn't my first Celtic talk, by the way, the one that's on your bookshelf. There was one before that I had. But we're there or thereabouts. We're of the same era, the same vintage, let's say. So we've seen social media being introduced to day-to-day society. We've seen bloody home computers, if you're as old as me, ZX Spectrum in 82, coming into your home life. And now it's everything that you need, all at the touch of look at the product placement, all at the touch of a mobile phone. And it's all there. So you can go online, you can chat, you can take photographs, you can watch videos, you can tune into this broadcast. It's all at the touch of a button, which is great because technology is fantastic and it allows us to do that. But the flip side of that is, the hellish experience that people have when they're on the end of harassment and bullying, sexism, racism, death threats. I mean, in relation to that, JP, I look at it all the time because it's a bit of a necessary evil if you have a broadcast, a podcast, any type of platform that you always have to be on social media engaging. And there's some great people I've met through that process, people who I would never have known otherwise. There's some real positives to be taken from it. But the dark side of that, JP, is such that sometimes you can't even bear to have a look at the notifications. If you switch on your phone and it's 20 plus, you think, what am I going to be faced with here? And that affects a lot of people. That really gets into their psyche, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if it was an FA, you said have done that.
There's a whole collection, JP, of English football groups. And that takes in league groups, associations, and various charities who have all got together to put their name on this open letter to both Facebook and Twitter.
Oh, well, that's good. Well, I mean, yeah, because like some of the way that people just think they can just literally write whatever they want and at somebody and then just sort of retreat back and go, I've just dropped that, bag of excrement on their door for the day. Like last night there was a comment about us, all four of us, and somebody said, "Oh, the years haven't been kind to the Scooby-Doo gang" or something like that, and I was just like, "That's terrible, patter." I mean, you're obviously trying to have a go or a dig or whatever. I don't know if he was a Celtic fan or not, but that was light-hearted in a way. Rubbish patter, but light-hearted. But then there's the other end of that spectrum where people do just go for it, and absolutely no holds barred, racism, sectarianism, homophobic, and you're just like, how have you actually managed to, let that come out of your mouth via Twitter or Facebook or whatever? Like, it's astonishing. It's like Declan said, you wouldn't go into a pub and just walk up to somebody and, unleash, a verbal attack on them and not expect to get clocked, So, yeah.
My biggest concern, JP, I seen the kind of revolution in real time, and I was doing some community work quite some time ago, and I was in a room with probably 12 to 14 school kids, and every single one of them was on their phones. And I remember looking at them thinking to myself, wow, this is the future. This is what it's going to be like. And that was probably 15, 16 years ago. And I could see that people were becoming addicted to these little devices, these smartphones. But the flip side of that is we're going to have a generation who are completely judgmental towards each other and to themselves. And I feel that we're going to have a whole generation who are going to be adversely affected by this type of thing. So for the football authorities down south to do that, I think is a positive step. But obviously those who run these massive organisations have to do something, and they have to do it better. Because, if you are giving someone abuse, it is classed as an electronic breach of the peace. Very much like if someone was in the street shouting in your face. It's an electronic version of that. So then they need to work with the authorities to ensure that this kind of thing is stamped out. And I think it's important. I mean, the only thing I would suggest, every single night I get in, which was pretty late last night after the game, it's got to be said, I put my phone somewhere in the house and I don't look at it. And that's what I try and do when I'm away from the kind of working environment. Because the worst thing you could possibly do is read some abuse and then go to bed. That's terrible. That's a terrible way to end your day. But I really do feel it's something that needs to be called out time and time again. We see it on a daily basis. Declan McConville, you're from a different generation to JP and I. We're part of the old Scooby-Doo gang, as it was noted last night. This has been part of your life, your entire adult life. I mean, how do you see it going? How can we do it better?
I think a bit better verification going on to social media platforms. I think there's too many people on there with no faces, no names that go out with agendas or just want to give people hard times of it. I have obviously been brought up with it. Technology crept into your guys' lives a wee bit slowly. Well, it was already there when I came into the world. So, everybody from my generation's been brought up with it. We've all kind of had iPads when we were 11, 12, whatever, and that's even creeping into younger kids now. So everybody knows how to use a phone, use an iPad, use a computer, whatever. So, as you say, Paul, Twitter can be a real positive place. And it's how I met you nearly 5 years ago now through Twitter. And a lot of good opportunities through it, a lot of great people on there with good stuff. But there is a dark side to it. But I think it can be done. Just people using apps to be a bit more positive. If you want to be critical of things, be critical, but do it in a way that's constructive. Don't go on to be abusive to people. But to anybody that uses Twitter and gets abuse or whatever, the block button's great. One click and it's away. You don't need to listen to it again. So that's my advice to anybody. The big Twitter block button, if you're getting a hard time of it, just press the button and that's it.
Absolutely. The one thing I would say, the positive I've seen over the last few weeks is your big pal Matt McGlone going out on his walks, and I've seen a lot of people actually responding to that, saying I've started doing that, and that's through Twitter. That's through Matt filming himself going out for a walk, and people thinking, yesterday. Right, there you go. So that's a positive influence of putting out a message, and that influencing people's day-to-day life in a small positive way, which is brilliant. Jungle Lion reminds us Shearer got Newcastle relegated. People forget that. We don't want someone like Larsson to come back and tarnish his legacy as an absolute icon of Celtic Park. But we do want to see change. We certainly do want to see change. Now, you were talking earlier, and actually, I had a wee vision when you were talking, JP, when you mentioned Roma. Was it Roma versus Milan?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? And next season, we could be looking at a situation. I read this morning a report that Roma's in for Odsonne Edouard, and obviously Milan's in for Ayer. And I'm thinking here, you've got Ayer, you've got Edouard, you've got Christie. What other big names do you think there's going to be a lot of interest in? And surely we can't sell them all in one go. We've already lost Frimpong. That's too much, I think. That's too wide a gap to try and bridge in one pre-season, surely.
It certainly is. I really worry about McGregor. I think somebody's going to come in for him, whether it's an English Premier League side or not, I don't know. But I think he's maybe one of the people that was convinced to stay on to try and go for 10 in a row, and that's not worked out. But I would hate to see McGregor leave Celtic, but at the same time, I kind of wouldn't begrudge him that move, because he has been at Celtic a long time. It's a short career. It's not like he's sort of running out on us, really. It's just really bad timing for us in terms of a rebuild. Christie, I think, has made it clear that he's not signing a new contract, so therefore he wants to go. And I know that Nice were linked with Christie in January, or certainly in the lead up to January. Nice would be an amazing. I'd love to go and play in Nice and live in the south of France. I don't know if I'd leave Celtic to do it, but I'd certainly not say no to that sort of move. But yeah, who knows? Ayer could be lining up against Edouard in Serie A, which would be surreal. But we've seen the guys play. We know what they can do. It's not as if you see comments coming on here where folk go, "These guys are deluded." Edouard, he's not that good, and Ayer can't defend, and all this sort of stuff. It's like, no, we watch them all the time. We're obviously massive Celtic fans, so we spend a lot of time watching them play. So, and I've been watching Celtic for 33 years, so I'd like to think I've got a bit of authority on who's a good player and who's not a good player. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying I'm an expert by no means, but I've got enough sort of Have we got enough bad players to compare to the good players over the years to sort of say, well, he's a player? I just want to say, Billy Boy with an H, by the way. Billy Boy 32 said, look at what Robert Duvall done at Kilnockie. A brilliant reference. If you haven't seen the film A Shot at Glory, I own it.
That's tremendous. That is tremendous.
I know it's got Ali McCoist in it, but it's Ali McCoist playing Jackie McQuillan, who is they make him an ex-Celtic player in it for some reason. So they've like photoshopped him in Celtic strips when he's actually wearing a Rangers strip. And Robert Duvall's Scottish accent in it. It just changes from scene to scene. You know, 1 minute he's like quite sort of Neddy Scottish accent, and then the next minute it's quite sort of old man kind of posh Scottish. It's brilliant. Michael Keaton's in it as well, bizarrely.
It's tremendous. Remember the Airdrie forward, Andy Smith?
Owen Coyling's in it as well. It was like a lot of the Airdrie players at the time randomly were in it. Maybe Kenny Black as well.
Oh, I remember him. I remember Kenny Black. You're talking about Owen Coyle. He's now managing in India, interestingly enough. You were talking about almost a semi-retirement, you know, going to Indian football, going to Chinese football. It's either semi-retirement or it's a stepping stone until they can get a job back here or elsewhere, I think. But you're right what you say there. We've seen it with Dembele. You knew the level he was at. I actually said it, you know, there's the obvious ones like Wanyama and Van Dijk, but I also remember watching Jason Denayer, and I know it wasn't instant with Denayer because he had a spell at Sunderland which wasn't great, but he's gone on to prove that he could play at a much higher level, and you can see them in Scottish football, JP, these guys who can make that step up. Was Frimpong one of those players? I thought he still had the potential to develop where he was. I think he's probably left a wee bit too soon, but you know, he could come back and prove us wrong. But I'm going to bring up one final point from Rabbi Bonds to say Frimpong not missed, average player and great feat. Is it a great fee? I don't think he was average, but I do agree with the first part of that. I don't think we've actually missed him. Declan, what's your thoughts on that? Because I feel defensively we've got more balance since he moved out the side.
Yeah, that's the word I would use, Paul, is balance. I think John Joe Kenny brings a kind of wee bit more stability to the side. Again, though, John Joe's been in there playing with Welsh and Dyer as his centre-back pairing. If the big duffster comes back in at the weekend, I don't know if there'll be as much balance in defence, but we'll just wait and see. But I certainly think John Joe Kenny's first instinct is to defend, whereas Frimpong's seem to always be to get forward. So I think there's a better balance to the team. If you play 4 defenders, you know what you're going to get. But if Big Duffy comes back in on Sunday, the balance might not be as nice.
Declan, are you going for your walk today, Declan?
Yes, I shall be.
Brilliant, good man. JP, you getting the final word on this broadcast today?
Just in the Denayer reference, he was also in one of my favourite Celtic songs of recent times, obviously started by the Green Brigade, a take on the Billy Joel classic, We Didn't Start the Fire. Remember that? We didn't sign Denayer, but it doesn't matter because we got Boyata. That was, I mean, football genius as far as I'm concerned, that song.
Creativity. Talking of which, I interviewed a band this morning called Dictator, and the interview will be out tomorrow to celebrate their new single, and I've just got to say they're all good Celtic men as well, so there you go. It seems to be a thread flowing through a lot of Scottish bands, JP, the good ones anyway. Thank you everybody for getting involved via our Twitter page and also on Facebook and on YouTube, but a big thank you to Declan McConville and JP Mason for joining me once again on